So, after the battles of the Sambre and Mons, you have the British retreat. Field Marshal Sir John French, quite upset and disturbed because Lanzerac left him. He feels that Lanzerac left him holding the bag and moved out really without regard to giving him information and leaving him here. So if we were to take a look very quickly at that overall map, sort of pick up where we left off in the last presentation. So the general headquarters of von Moltke is over here, right? The general headquarters of General Joffre is here. And up in this part of the line, an important part because it has to be cleared. If this holds, it's harder and more difficult for that German right wing to fold over and carry out the Schlieffen Plan because it means they all have to filter around. And if you remember, the original Schlieffen Plan here called for, right, the German 3rd, 4th Army, the 5th Armies to sort of hook round, right, like this. Now, what we'll also see is that as we bring Paris closer, the Germans were going to be left with a choice. We'll talk about that in a moment. But here we have Lanzerac in the French 5th Army, and John French, Field Marshal French, in the German or the English, the British Expeditionary Force, moving back to Le Cateau. Lanzerac moving down. And so what we see is this line folds, and so does the French position. It folds. And so it's going to go back. It's going to go back. And what we're going to get is the Aisne River here, A-I-S-N-E, Aisne River, right? And the Marne. So if we move over, we see Paris. So if we move over, we see Paris. So Paris being here. And so this line's going to fold. And so as it folds, right, it's going to come down. You're going to have this Aisne River here. And then the Meaux River and the Oise. And the Meaux River here. And the Marne. Paris is here. The question that's going to be for the Germans is, as this Allied line folds down, what's going to happen to the Germans? Are they going to go around like this and have part of their army wing hook round Paris to this side of Paris, the west side of Paris, or do they choose the eastern side of Paris? Part of that's going to be dictated, you would think, by the positions of the French and British enemy. Also, the positions of strength and reinforcements available in the city of Paris itself. If Paris has like very strong forces and things, it might be much more advisable to hook round Paris on the west side. But moving this way here might be less advised, because that would open your flank to threat here. The other danger is that the groups that have to move around to the west of Paris will be separated from the rest of the German attack. General Joffre was a man with a problem. His armies are folding back, and the reports on the British Expeditionary Force said that they were broken, that not to expect much from them, and Lanzerac was certainly happy to give that report. But what Joffre was understanding is that Lanzerac was a liability, and even though he was a friend and a longtime colleague, he was learning to doubt Lanzerac. And the reports on the British Army, as you saw in the BBC presentation, were really not true at all. The only reason the British looked like they did was because it demoralizes troops. So troop morale suffers when you're on long retreats. So in long marches, that's not an offensive. You see a complete turnaround in attitude when they take the offensive, but that would need the Allies would need time to regroup, reposition, and deploy their strength efficiently to attack the Germans. And that's what they do in this upcoming battle, the first battle of the Marne. So what we have by the 26th of August is Lanzerak's been pushed back with his 5th Army, facing the 2nd Army of the Germans by von Bülow, right? So you had those pushbacks. Here's the BEF, supported by the French, all the way dressing this left flank. 6 territorial reserve divisions got placed on the left flank here. Why? Because of the reports of the BEF being demoralized or broken by some of the French officers, especially Lanzerak's group. Joffre decided to reinforce this left side, so keeping this flank strong. But here what you see is the line where the French have retreated to and the English have retreated to after their first month's encounter with the Germans. So this is how the line is moving. What's been done is Belgium here has been cleared, and you have these armies ready to pound through. So that right wing is ready to pivot and turn, but it's not moving as far out as necessarily originally intended, but it's there. And so this is the situation by August 26th, 1914. What we see is attempts at offensives, especially in the southern part by the 1st and 2nd Army against Ruprecht's 6th Army, really to no avail. Really to no avail. Here we have a reserve and we have a German offensive. That strong right wing is now here, and look, they're trying to punch a hole and push this line down, 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 and get that pivot wing going. So we'll see how effective they are. Not an easy task. By August 30th, the fighting had pushed the Allies back. They were on their heels. But it was all right, because what's happening here is, if you look at their positions, right, the French and the English actually have the beginnings of an advantage here. Now the Germans are trying to reinforce. They can't bring reinforcements from here, so they are trying to move people along their interior lines to reinforce. But this movement, the choice is, how do we go around Paris? And it looks like they're swinging out to the west. This move, and remember how we talked about coordination of attack and unity of command, that communication was important? Well, guess what? We saw what happened with the French inability of their armies to stay coordinated in the attack in the southern side. We talked about the difficulty of the BEF and Lanzerak's French 5th Army staying in contact and having not good results. Well, here is the point where we get the German army to break down. Because here, the 1st Army under von Kluck and the 2nd Army under von Bülow, here opens a gap. There's a gap that opens between these two armies, and it becomes a little more pronounced. You can see them separated, with the 2nd dressing itself facing here, the French 5th Army under Lanzerak. The BEF under Sir John French, Field Marshal French, stationed here, able to threaten the flank of the German 1st Army, which is facing directly the French 6th Army under Manoury, General Manoury. And here you have two groups dressing the left flank of the Allies. you have German advances on the French third and fourth armies by the third, fourth, and fifth German armies under Hausen, Albrecht, and the Crown Prince. So the Germans are still advancing, but that advance would prove to be something that actually makes their lives a lot more difficult. By the late 2nd of September, the Germans are still on the offensive. Okay? They're still on the offensive. And now look at how this army has dressed itself. The French and the British, the Allies, have now hinged down. So if we examine their line, it looked like this, and now it's just folding back, 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 and back. So it's crumpling. Here, the Germans launch offensives on August 30th along these lines to dress the French 6th Army, which was a newly constituted army to help provide support for the BEF, cobbled together by General Schlieffen, and then trying to dress Landsberg's 5th Army in concert with German 2nd Army under von Bülow. At the same time, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Armies would also be staging. That strong right wing is now in this position. They're trying to get around, keep getting around. Right? Right there. And the question is, do we go around Paris or don't we? And they make the fateful decision to not go around the west side of Paris, but around this side here. And you can see that developing with that offensive. So, as we talk about this moment in time, we have to think about how far the Germans have come. This Schlieffen Plan, for all of its flaws, looks like it's working. So what goes wrong? So by the 5th of September, this is the position. The Germans are still pushing the French, and the British over here. But what the German First Army has done is further opened this gap here, right? That's a gap. So this gap is being filled right now with the British Expeditionary Force, exposing flanks. And so the 5th Army, by the way, after Landsberg's performance, General Joffre fired him, naming a new French general, Franchet Desperay. What Joffre had now was an opportunity to stage a counteroffensive and push back the German army. Paris was garrisoned and had military reserves. It was under martial law now, as the government escaped for their own protection. And even Paris taxicabs, the famous Renault Paris taxicabs, were used to ferry soldiers to the front lines for action in what would become the Battle of the Marne. And this is the main position right at the start of the Battle of the Marne, and it's set up so by 5 September they are in position. And there'd be a little more positioning and then a counter-offensive. Dressing off of the city of Paris to the left. The British Expeditionary Force takes advantage of that exposed German flank here. So while the 6th French Army under General Monroy is here, the British threaten their flank. Franchet Desperay's 5th French Army also moves into the fight. These two parts of the army, the 2nd Army under von Bülow and the 1st Army under von Kluck, have far too much gap between them. Okay, they're not particularly dressing it. And so what it's done is created a problem. So that communication was not effective enough to close that gap. Their coordination wasn't effective enough to close that gap. and in so doing opened a big hole that helped the BEF really punch a hole through the remnants of the Schlieffen Plan. This flank attack threatened the German position and rolled them up. And what we also see is that the British Expeditionary Forces in good spirit, the French start to enjoy good spirit, and they start to enjoy success. Paris is spared, and what we see is a push back on the German line here. So here, if we can draw, right, you've got the BEF, which attacked that flank, which required them to slip up to here. The First Army had to slip up under von Kluck. The 7th Army has to be reallocated. So one of the things they talk about is the value of interior lines, something that you'll hear about a lot in the American Civil War, especially with regards to the Battle of Gettysburg, where, pardon my drawing, the Union Army is arrayed like a fish hook, like this, or a shepherd's cane, right? Because it can allocate forces interior, right? Very easy, back and forth, to send forces, reinforcements off of one side where they're less needed and to other sides where they're more necessary. Okay, the Germans were starting to take advantage of some of that. And so they were shifting. So we see the 7th Army come out of reserve, right? And we see this left side, or this right side on the Allies side here, the left side of the German army, weakened a bit, sending reinforcements to that strong right wing. Now, you see the German retreat. They are compelled to retreat because of that gap. They close the gap and they retreat here. And they make their stance. And so what the Germans decide to do is dig in and start using entrenched positions. The French and the English can easily oblige. So, how do you roll them up? Okay, by the 17th, 18th of September, this is the extreme left flank of the Allies and the extreme right flank of the German army. The only way they feel that you're going to gain an advantage in this business is by flank attack, because this line is too difficult to have frontal assaults. So they start a series of flank attacks up, and they counter, and up, all trying to outflank the other side, gain the advantage, and then hopefully roll down the line. But it keeps going. And this process is called the race to the sea. Flank attack after flank attack does this until finally you get the first battle of Ypres. The British called it Wipers, but it's pronounced Ypres. And it's in northern Belgium, and the First Battle of Wipers, held between 12 October and 11 November, sort of settles down and helps to settle this. Now, the Germans, you might say, why are they digging in? Defensive positions are an advantage, as you've seen. They can save lives in the face of superior numbers or equal numbers with high technology like they've had, machine guns, artillery. And the Germans also figure, since the Schlieffen Plan is now no longer, the odds of it being the short war that they had dreamed of pretty much gone. Now the French, they're sitting in French and Belgian territory. It's up to those armies to move them out. So the strength is actually, in this case, on the German side, where, of course, they don't have to move, but they can. Now, what are some of the other problems facing the Germans? 1, supplies. The Germans moved so far, so fast, that they were just running low on everything. Food, provisions, especially for horses. Horses were being fed provisions that were green, meaning green hay. It hadn't had a time to really dry out, and that can give the horses all kinds of stomach problems and kill them. So you have people falling asleep on their horse, collapsing on their horses. These men are exhausted. They've been at it for the better part of 2 straight months, marching fast, joining a battle, retreating, moving around, and having marched a few hundred miles. This race to the sea denies either side a decisive flanking movement that can help roll this line down. And so you get the Battle of Wipers. So here we are at the Battle of Wipers, up here. And during this month of fighting, this closes off any possibility, and it's in the section of Flanders, Belgium. This closes off the possibility of any more flanking maneuvers. And what happens is that by November 11th, you have a fairly stabilized front line on the Western Front that stretches hundreds of miles from the English Channel here in the north all the way to the mountainous Swiss border here on the south of the line. So after basically 3 months of incredible movement, hundreds of miles being crossed by foot soldiers making 20 to 25 miles per day, horses being ridden so that their backs are worn raw under the saddle, infantrymen with blisters, broken boots, worn boots within a month, within a few weeks, all settles down. And the German attitude towards this is simple. As long as we're here, the English and the French have to move us from this territory. We can take up a defensive position and force them to move us because we are in their territory. And the French and the English have to figure out how to move them. The other problem that they're facing is that because of the advantage of the defense here, and that there's no easy way to flank, offenses are going to have to be frontal assaults. And that's not necessarily a good idea. So as we talk about what goes on in 1915 and the strategic problems facing the armies and the battlefronts there, you certainly get a taste of that. So what happened to the Schlieffen Plan at its very basic? What happened to that strong right wing that had made it so close to Paris? And why do I think this failed? Well, you have your reasons. And when we look at these in total, what I want us to think about is, one, overrunning and the constant need for supplies, the exhaustion given to the soldiers and the troops. That's certainly it. But the French and British had a breakdown in communication. They had a breakdown in morale. They had a breakdown in the unity of command. However, you have General Joffre, who was very good at firing people he felt were incompetent and not putting up with them for very long. So he was good at putting better commanders in positions if he could. He would personally communicate to all of the generals, so he would spend most of these early days visiting with the generals of all of these armies, trying to help them work together. And they address their communication problems over time, especially as you get new and more capable commanders in the French army. On the other side, the German side, you have a breakdown in communication at a most critical point, and that is here, right? By September, you have the British Expeditionary Force and the French launch this attack on the flank that was left exposed by the German army. And when they do that, it rolls up that right wing. So their supplies, they were back, they've been exhausted, they've made a fateful error, and now hooking and hooking and hooking and hooking and hooking over and over. The French army, quite frankly, were much more powerful and capable than the Germans had anticipated, as were the English. They came within their decisive battle within 40 days, but they didn't achieve that goal. And so now, few people thought this would be a short war, as the realities of trench warfare and warfare of attrition started to settle in. So things to look out for: a unity of command. The French had trouble with it. The Germans never really had trouble with it. They fought as one unit. But communication and effective communications between two groups, making sure people have orders and those orders are followed, that there's, even if there's disagreement, that those disagreements, once a decision is made, the disagreement is stifled.